My God, I hate drugs.
Today marks 4 years since the deadly Mama Sapano encounter. Moro rebels killed 44 members of the PNP Special Action Force on January 25, 2015. PNP Chief Oscar Albayalde will lead a commemoration of the Day of National Remembrance this morning. In this report, our Ina Andalong looks back at the incident.
Special Action Force troops were in Mama Sapano as early as 2:30 in the morning of January 25, armed with an arrest warrant for what were called high-value targets. Then SAF Chief Getulio Napeñas told his suspended boss, Alan Purisima, and PNP officer in charge, Leonardo Espina, about the operation at 4:35 and 4:38 a.m. respectively. The operation seemed to have gone well. Police Superintendent Hendrix Mangaldan, the SAF battalion commander on the ground, updated his superior Napeñas on the troop movement. Part of the mission was accomplished. Messages from Napeñas' phone, though, were unclear on what time the commandos killed Julkifli Binhir alias Marwan. The closest to telling his time of death was Espina's congratulatory text to Napeñas at 5:48 a.m. It was also about this time, or at 5:43, that SAF Commander Mangaldan texted Napeñas, "Padami na tao, sir, request loudspeaker operation," perhaps referring to hostile forces. Purisima informed President Aquino about the operation around this time. 5:45, he told the President that Marwan was killed and that his body was left behind. That's the first confirmation on Marwan's death. But there was trouble ahead. At 7:12, Mangaldan sent an SMS to Napeñas on information he received that MILF troops were mobilizing. At 7:26, General Espina asked Napeñas if backup came. Napeñas replied with an update. Marwan was neutralized and that there was heavy firefight and SAF troops suffered casualties. He said extraction was ongoing and that support from the AFP was requested. At 7:53, Napeñas texted then SAF Deputy Chief Noli Talino that the commandos were in combat and at the same time asked for artillery support. By this time, President Aquino asked General Purisima how difficult it was for a 160-strong SAF team to resist what he believed were only 15 to 20 rebels. Napeñas again asked for artillery support at 7:55, this time from all his superiors, Purisima, Espina, and Talino. Talino replied at 7:58, nega daw muna artillery at baka may mga civis or civilians at mga bata. But he added 6 armors as well as an infantry of about 50 were on standby. Purisima told Napeñas the request for artillery support was forwarded to Rusti, likely referring to General Rustico Guerrero, the chief of the Western Mindanao Command, perhaps Purisima's proof that he also asked for backup. Purisima then assured the president at 8:17 that tank and artillery support was on the way, only to again hear calls for assistance from Napeñas at 8:39 a.m. Napeñas again told Generals Pangilinan and Guerrero that there were no civilians on the ground. It would appear in the next messages that both Purisima and Espina were talking to the same persons for reinforcement. Purisima and Espina even relate to Napeñas a message from Pangilinan, who said troops from Sharif Aguac were moved as early as 8:20 in the morning, but said fire support will need a field officer on the ground. Pangilinan told Espina the armored vehicles can't move through marshes and swamps. President Aquino at this time still appeared clueless on the fate of the SAF troops. At 10:16 a.m., the president's only text to Purisima was to capture Basit Usman. The suspended PNP chief would, in the next hour, tell the president that the main mission was for the troops to exit from the rebel-controlled area. It was only at 10:23 that Napeñas started receiving messages from Interior Secretary Mar Rojas, but these were forwarded by Espina. Rojas asked about Marwan's body that was left behind. At 10:35 a.m., Napeñas told Espina that the enemies outnumbered the SAF commandos. Several hours since the initial request for military aid, SAF Ground Commander Mangaldan was still asking for reinforcements at 12:24 in the afternoon. This would continue in the next hour. At 1:04 p.m., Napeñas sent a message to Espina. Baka maubos tao natin sa lugar na ito. He also reiterated the request for indirect fire support. But there was no help despite the distress calls. The bad news came at 3:58 p.m. PNP Intelligence Chief Charles Calima texted Napeñas an unconfirmed message saying that 22 troops were killed and their belongings taken. It said the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters beheaded 2 SAF officers and that the police commandos may have run out of firepower. At 6:30 in the evening, Napeñas told Secretary Rojas lawless elements engaged SAF troops on their exit. Text exchanges over the next 2 hours were about rescuing those in the battlefield and wounded. By this time, more than half a day had passed since the operation started. It wasn't until 10:47 p.m. that a message from General Napeñas' phone indicated that rescue was near. But with only 1 SAF officer surviving what seemed an endless encounter, the rescue didn't come to where it was needed. At 5:45 a.m. the next day, Mangaldan sent a text to Napeñas saying the dead were accounted for and that there were no other troops missing in action. The president knew about the dead commandos at 6:20 p.m. Purisima told his boss that the SAF troops were overrun and suffered casualties. Ina Andolong, CNN Philippines.
Former President Benigno Noynoy Aquino III is currently facing trial for the botched Oplan exodus in Mamasapano. He's facing charges of graft and usurpation of authority. Aquino insists he's ready to face the court. In other news, members of the ISIS-linked Maute group clashed with government forces in Lanao del Sur yesterday morning. The military says 3 Maute members were killed. To give us an update, we now have on the line 103rd Infantry Brigade Commander Colonel Romeo Browner Jr. Good morning, sir. Thank you for taking our call.
Yes, good morning, Ria, and good morning to our televiewers.
Sir, what is the situation on the ground right now? Is the clash that started yesterday between government forces and members of the Maute group over, or is it still taking place?
It's still ongoing, Ria. In fact, this morning, our troops were able to overrun the encampment of Abu Dar. Unfortunately, they retreated backwards towards the higher areas of the mountain peak. So we are now doing a pursuit operation. And this morning, we were also able to evacuate already our 3 wounded soldiers.
Okay, you mentioned this appears to be in a mountainous area. Can we assume that there are not too many civilians who could be caught in the crossfire?
Yes, that's correct. There are no civilians in the area. In fact, it's a very mountainous area, thickly forested area. So we heard that there were fake news circulating that there were civilians caught in the crossfire. This is not true. So right now, we only have indicated about 3 dead, 3 killed in the side of the the group of Abu Dar, but we are expecting more.
Okay, how many more Maute members is the military going after? Do you have an estimate?
We estimate that their group now is between 20 to 30.
20 to 30 individuals. Do you think you can wrap up this operation within the day, sir?
We hope so. We hope we'll be able to fix that group, that small group, and then finish them off today.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Colonel Romeo Browner Jr. of the 103rd Infantry Brigade.
World Youth Day is supposed to be all about the youth celebrating their faith with the Pope, but it's happening during one of the greatest crises of his pontificate. CNN's Rosa Flores reports from Panama.
This is Pope Francis's first full day in Panama for World Youth Day. This event is supposed to be all about the celebration of the youth and of their faith with Pope Francis. But this is happening during arguably one of the greatest crises of the Pope's pontificate. There are investigations into clergy sex abuse all over the globe, and this region is no exception. I have talked to 2 survivors from Costa Rica who have asked for an audience with the Pope. And as is customary, the Vatican does not announce if or when audiences will be granted. But a spokesperson does say that the Pope might talk about the topic. Look, this is a coming home of sorts for Pope Francis. No, he's not Panamanian. He is Argentinian, but he's the first Latin American Pope. He speaks Spanish. He knows the culture and the language. His 10 speeches are going to be in Spanish. He also knows about the problems and the ills of the region. In this first day, he brought up a topic immigration, mass migration, the topic that has the United States in a partial government shutdown. And here's the guidance that he provided for the bishops. He said that the church should not only welcome migrants, but that the church should also be part of the dialogue that helps the countries receiving the migrants overcome their fears. Rosa Flores, CNN, Panama.
Contenders for the 2020 U.S. presidential election are ready to take on President Donald Trump. But first, they're giving the supporters a lesson on how to say their names correctly. CNN's Jeannie Moos reports.
Fighting the line.
There's a new Democrat looking to run for president. If only we could pronounce his name.
Oh my God, Pete Buttigieg.
Pete Buttigieg. You try saying the name of South Bend, Indiana's mayor.
I'm Pete Buttigieg. But around South Bend, they just call me Mayor Pete, and that's fine with me.
What isn't fine is that so many of the Democratic presidential wannabes have names that trip you up. Don't call him Julian Castro.
No, my name is Julian.
And don't do what Whoopi did when she introduced